Good morning, everybody. This is Thursday, September 21st, 2023 already, just a few days away from fall. This is the Podman Community Cabal meeting. We have just one discussion point today, so I hope people brought good questions for us so we can fill up some of the time that I'm sure we'll have. And with that said, I am just going to turn it over to our one topic, and Matt had decided to lead that, and I'm sure Brent can also jump in also. And that's talking about default settings for Podman 4.7, which just came out. Matt?
Okay, so we have Podman 4.7 RC1 out now. We're looking for an RC. We might do an RC2 this week, I'll put it that way. And then we are definitely doing a 4.7 final next week just to get the schedule out of the way. And we're at a very late point in this release, but it's still not too late for us to discuss certain configuration changes that we'd like to make, because we'd like them to soak in Fedora for a while before we put them in RHEL, frankly, but also because we'd like to get these out as soon as possible so people can actually start using them. One of the more important ones here is switching default database. We had the SQLite driver added in Podman 4.6, but we haven't made it default yet. We've been letting it sit, and I think at this point we're pretty happy with how stable it is. We've been running it through CI extensively. We haven't had issues. So we would like to swap the default database from BoltDB to SQLite for new installations only in 4.7. We're still going to be supporting the Bolt database, and if you have a pre-existing Bolt database, you'll keep using it. But SQLite will be the default for new installs in 4.7, or at least we'd like it to be. And I believe there were some other things called out in the default features.
Oh, before you go there, Brent had a question in the chat. Matt?
Sure. It is not the default in the main branch, Brent. So we would have to get this developed and in over the next week. But it's honestly, at this point, this is an hour's worth of code. So this is not a difficult thing to get in.
The reason I asked is it would seem, I mean, I want to make the change too, so I'm supportive of whatever decision the team makes, but it would seem reasonable that for one development cycle, it would be the default in the main branch while we work on, say, 4.8 or whatever it ends up to be, just so that we have a little bit of soak time on our own hands.
Yeah. Would it be possible to do that before RC2?
We were not initially planning on an RC2. If I worked on it this afternoon, I think there's a decent chance we could get it, done. But it would be cutting it very close. Paul and Valentin, you had your hands up?
Yeah, in my opinion, doing this now is not in the purpose of doing an RC1, and it's not the expectation when we say we are feature frozen and we decide to change a critical default, which is the database is critical. So
honestly, I don't know when this agenda item was added. I feel like it was intended to be discussed a lot sooner. So I think you're right about that. A lot of these are going to end up being 4.8 regardless. We are too late in the cycle to do major things. I don't necessarily view the SQLite database as a major thing just because of how much we've tested it, but I agree with you that we are very late.
Oh, can we not just, we've branched, right?
Yeah, we're branched. We could easily throw all this stuff in main
do the work
now.
And flick it now and make it a 4.8 target. That would, I mean, I'm kind of agreeing with Paul here in the sense that enabling features is sort of naughty on the release candidates. So what's the downside of waiting a 4.8 other than it doesn't get out there?
I think that is the big downside.
Okay.
Its first release will be, it'll go out everywhere, basically. It'll go out to SendStream, RHEL, etc.
It would seem reasonable to me that we, if we want to soak it in Fedora, we should have soaked it in main. At least that's my gist, and I'll check out after that.
I'm not going to push too hard for making changes this late in the game. I mean, it's small enough that I would say it's doable, but that doable and sensible are different things. given that, are we okay with saying no big changes 4.7? Let's just change this agenda item to say 4.8 because 4.8 is looking like our next big release.
Well, I have slight concerns of doing that kind of change for real without it soaking in Fedora first. And we target a 4.8 in between here and realm in February.
Well, let's see. We're gonna have 4.8 or 4.7 out late September. If we want to do a 4.8 or late November, early December, we could do that. It wasn't on the plan, but it's not. As long as it's just an upstream release, it doesn't add that much burden to what we're doing. Does everyone agree with that?
This is I guess, the downside of the forced March schedule we've done.
Yeah.
In the past, we've released when we're ready. And at this point, I could make a strong argument because Hyper-V just missed 4.7. I can make a strong argument that I would want to, if I was making decisions and releases were easy, I'd want a 4.8 in a month. But that's a quicker cadence than we've done. It's quicker cadence than we've done in a while, but it makes sense. So that may be what we need to do is say for 4.8 we will do SQLite, and we need to go back now and talk about our release schedule for 4.8.
Valentin, you're up.
I think we need to start doing nodes because we had this conversation multiple times in this year. What we said for Fedora or discussed was to just make it a containers conf setting and default it there. So we don't necessarily need to do that in the main branch. But one thing we didn't test yet is, or I don't think we tested it, is we need to make sure that even for existing deployments, even if we default to SQLite, to make sure that the existing VaultDB database continues to be used. This is something that has not been done yet, to my knowledge. So we are not ready to just flip it now. There's still some work to be done on this front. With respect to merging things into RC, I would block every feature into our RCs. It bit us a number of times, and we came up with the dogma to never merge features during RC phase. And I think we should continue to stick to it. Otherwise, we just keep on biting us in the tail. Because especially for things that haven't been properly tested or bigger things, they will always introduce regressions, and that is what makes the release process, or tended in the past to make it hard. Just a reminder on this front.
So are you okay with doing the changes in the 4.8 for the SQLite?
Sure. Well, as long as we're ready and as long as upgrade scenarios work. So what needs to work is that unless being specified in containers conf, where a user explicitly says, I want to use SQLite, or explicitly being set on the CLI, if the internal default from memory is SQLite and there's an existing VaultDB database, we need to use this VaultDB database. Otherwise, on update, users will not see any of their objects, containers, volumes, networks, etc. anymore.
I don't really view that as a big problem, Valentin. We've done it before for the CNI to NetArc move. We know how to do it. It's an afternoon to get the code written and tested, in my view.
Absolutely, but it's an item that hasn't been done for many months now, and it's something we need to do before flipping the default and before shipping it. It's just something, I'm not saying it's hard, I'm just saying it needs to be done.
Yeah. Where does 4.7 live? Is it still up in Maine?
It's branched already.
Is it
We
branched?
branched before RCs now.
Okay. So we could make the changes in Maine at any point in time.
At this point, if we're thinking about 4.8, the sooner the better. Otherwise, we will forget about them.
Yep, that's my thinking as well.
I think we've come to a general decision here that we're going to do it in 4.8. The only question is how we're going to do 4.8, whether it's going to be in early release. We have a guaranteed release coming out in February. Are we going to do a release before that and have February before 9? So this is, I think we can move on the assumption that the release schedule will be decided later. Is everyone comfortable with that? All right. The next default we wanted to talk about was zstandard chunked plus gzip split compression. We do not have Ani in the room to discuss this. Anyone else here sufficiently comfortable with image formatting to talk about this? Because frankly, I'm not as up to speed on this as I should be.
Giuseppe would be our other person, perhaps.
Yeah, would also point to Giuseppe. Giuseppe, you mentioned that at least chunked isn't yet ready for prime time, right?
Yeah, it's not ready. There is still an open issue in containers image that needs to be merged. So I think we should postpone it for now.
I have no objection to that. Paul?
I think what Dan was throwing around was always like that you push like this multi-manifest thing with setstd and gzip by default. I think that was what Dan wanted, so that, you know, new clients can benefit from the faster setstd pulls.
Yeah, but still, well, first of all, the feature it needs to be manually enabled, and second, it's not ready without the changes that the containers image is kind of broken. So I mean, it's fine for a proof of concept, but without that changes, it's not really usable right now.
Yeah. Is this something that you think will be ready by late November or February timeframe, Giuseppe, or beyond that?
I'm working on that. I mean, I hope this will be done in the next few weeks.
Okay.
I think this is something very critical, because if Podman is being used, so if the goal is to compress images by default with C standards, with C standard compression, this can break a lot of deployments. So I think, in my opinion, this is something Podman 5.0. Because imagine if you have a build pipeline, you use the Podman, let's say the Podman container image, or you update Fedora on your server, you have your build pipeline, you build the image, you push it, and suddenly your clients or your deployments outside in the wild start to break because they do not support C standard yet. Maybe older versions of Docker, maybe very, 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 very old versions of Scopio, Podman, or Builder. This can break.
But the idea is to push both compression formats, no? Like to have a period where you push setstd and gzip, which of course is bandwidth more expensive and time. But I think that was what Dan was always suggesting.
This could, in theory, break as well if the deployments expect a single image manifest and not an OCI index on the registry. So I guess where I'm pointing at is this: before deciding this default, I think we need to do some, I don't find a better word, sorry, risk management of which things may break, put everything on on the desk and then look at all potential risks and then check whether we feel comfortable doing. But this changes what or how images look like and the nature of images. And this is something where I'm feeling uncomfortable.
I think it's valid concerns, but are you comfortable with delivering Podman 5.0 in RHEL in September next year? Is it worth waiting that long for the zstd chunk? Or are we going to get pushback if it's not in before then?
I would even challenge whether it's reasonable for a Podman image push to push a manifest if there is a Podman manifest push. So I think we're at the risk of conflating or breaking things. So I would even question whether we should do it or not. So I can't really answer that. That's all.
Okay, that's fair.
What I am hearing here is that we are extremely uncomfortable with this going into RHEL first. So this absolutely, I mean, even if we do a 4.8 beforehand, it sounds like it's probably not going to be ready. This does sound like it needs a lot of additional testing. So this is, if we're doing something between the February release and the next RHEL release, this is potentially a good time frame for that. That sound reasonable? I mean, assuming that we can make it work.
I think we should follow up on this soon, so that we make sure that the thinking continues about the issues or about this particular issues. How do we want it to behave? What are we trying to achieve, and what are we at risk of breaking? At the moment, it's just me throwing my foot in the door, but I would be curious. I don't see Miloslav in the meeting, but Nalin, as the build specialist, what are your feelings about this?
Again?
How do you feel about the idea of just pushing these multi-compressed image manifests instead of a single image on Podman push?
I don't think I have any thoughts that haven't already been voiced about additional bandwidth. And I mean, I'm not really worried about compatibility with registries at this point. Well, there's bandwidth, there's the compute for compression, because when you're building in a cluster, compression actually is one of the more expensive parts.
This should work with the new. I'm assuming it gets into Podman. It should work with the new farm builds, right? At least in theory.
I thought we did this at push time, so we didn't actually modify the images when they were on disk because they're not compressed on disk when you build them.
No, farm build is something orthogonal. This makes creating multi-arch manifest lists easier, but it doesn't address the issue of compression algorithms and us trying to push for C standard as the new standard.
Are we comfortable leaving this here and doing a follow-up later with more? I think we're really suffering from missing Miloslav and Adi and Dan. Would be okay with having a meeting later? Would we have more people who actually know a lot about this in the meeting?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
All right. In that case, I propose that we move on to the next one, which is setting default network command to pasta by default. Paul, this one is mostly you. Feelings on it? Are we stable enough to do this?
No. I mean, it depends. The biggest problem is the outstanding work that we need to deliver the rootless NetNS logic, like if you use named networks, and that's still hard-coded to Slurp. So as long as that isn't addressed, then I don't see a point in defaulting to pasta for the normal Podman run, because then that means that every distribution definitely needs to require both as default, for example. Or like I don't particularly see the benefit of switching it before the networking stuff works fully.
Okay. And this is mostly the pasta maintainers, not us?
No, that would be me. Also a bit on pasta, but like the thing how it works is that we have these intermediate namespace, and inside this namespace we just use network with bridge networking. But to connect this intermediate namespace with a host namespace, you need the rootless networking tool, so either Slurp or Pasta. And since this was written, well, two and a half years ago, that it just uses Slurp. And now I need to convert this code, and it's not particularly easy, I would say. There are corner cases everywhere, basically, and assumptions. And you know, when I touch the code, I try to make it better. So it's a bit of a longer process to get this done.
So ultimately what I'm hearing is this is a question of allocation of team resources. Cough, Brent, cough.
Sort of, yes. And I always have it in my queue, but like it's always something comes on top of it usually. So I didn't make progress in the last weeks.
Why are we coughing with my name?
Really, it sounds like this switching to pasta by default is enough work that we're going to need. It's not going to get done unless it's prioritized, is what I'm hearing from Paul. Does that sound accurate?
It would make it much faster if we
Sure.
say that's a priority.
Well,
But,
you guys get to prioritize as much as I do.
How long do you think it would take, Paul, if you were just singularly devoted to it to wrap it up?
Well, the problem is like putting out, like I know what needs to be done, and writing the code, that's maybe a week of work. But then making sure it all comes together and like everything works. The problem, the one outstanding problem why I haven't like devoted more time on it is port forwarding problem. So right now, what really happens is that with port forwarding, we use the router's port process. So that's a process that we spawn per container. And the problem is that this process is like it's a dumb proxy basically, and it mangles the source IP. So that's the biggest complaint with like rootless networking and with port forwarding. Like, where's my source IP in your web server log? That's not very good for auditing stuff, you know. If your web server is compromised and you don't have the IPs. And I don't have a good answer to the port forwarding problem. With Pasta, we can do port forwarding, but it's missing the option to do this dynamically. So as we spawn, like we would need, we only have one Pasta process in this rootless networking scenario, and that means we need runtime port forwarding capabilities, and that's not in Pasta. So I talked to the Pasta maintainers. They like we are on an agreement that it can be done, and they accept patches, but it's like you know, somebody needs to prioritize and make the work, and so it's kind of stuck.
Fair enough. Personally, I would love to see this in 5.0. So that gives us a fair bit of time. But it would be very nice to have 5.0 with the improved networking.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, right now we have a lot of users like trying it out, just a regular parser with like Podman run -- network parser, and there we were able to fix many bugs already. So I think it's getting to a point where it's definitely stable enough to say we do this as default. So
Okay. Anything else on this? I think we know what needs to be done. We know it is a lot of work, and it's probably going to need to be bubbled up in priorities at some point. But anything else?
Well, I don't know if I don't need a hard answer for this, but what are you thinking for 5.0 delivery timeframe? Are you thinking next summer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometime early summer-ish, I think we were thinking about. This was potentially the next release after the February drop. Although we have options here again. If we really feel like we need some soak before 5.0, we can give it less time and have an intermediate.
I think if we really want to push 5.0 through, then it should be for or before RHEL 10. Because I guess in RHEL 9 and 8 we can't ship 5.
So you're thinking like a 5.0 and say early spring, and then a 5.1 for RHEL 10, possibly?
I do not know. I do not know, but it would make sense to have some soak time of 5.0 and Fedora before throwing it into RHEL 10.
I concur.
And for reference here, a lot of the breaking changes we're thinking about in 5.0 are going to be machine stuff, so not directly relevant to the RHEL schedule. This is mostly getting Podman machine in a more sane position than it is right now.
There's a couple of comments in our code and upstream issues that would impact RHEL as well.
Yeah, of course. We have a lot of accumulated 5.0 stuff.
yeah, I find it more useful to make a list with what we want to do for 5.0. And we were talking this week about containers.conf, for example. And I find it hard to set a deadline without seeing what we want to do first.
What I'm really hearing is that we probably need a 5.0 doc at some point, like this or next week, that we can just start accumulating what needs to be done. And from there, we can figure out exactly what's in, what's out, and what the schedule is.
Yeah. It's an excellent thought. Good thought, Paul.
I'll take responsibility for making that. I can do it after lunch. Anyways, if we are okay with saying that 5.0 planning can wait, I think we have a couple things that are slam dunks for 4.8. Those being deprecating CNI and deprecating Podman generate system D. Valentin, did we already deprecate generate system D, or was that just being discussed?
It is already deprecated, but not dropped. So deprecation, since there are multiple interpretations of what deprecation means, in this case, we set deprecation to just encourage users. There will be a warning now being emitted and using it, pointing users to quadlet. No new features will be added, only important bug fixes will be added. We could consider dropping it entirely with Podman 5.0, but it's used. Generate system D is used in many pipelines, and personally, I don't think it hurts to keep it around if we can spare some admins some very, very hard time. For sure, I would love people to jump on Quadlet, but the deprecation will at least, or hopefully, be sufficiently annoying at some point that people will jump to it. And we also did it because Generate System D has been out for a long, long while. So even experienced Podman users don't know yet about Quadlet. It just takes time until this bubbles up to users.
Yeah. So I think that deprecate what you said, emitting warnings and putting in the man pages that it's going to be dropped at some point is sufficient. At this point, the only question is whether we do that to CNI as well. And now that we have the plugin system in NetArc, I think the answer is yes.
For 5.0.
4.8. Potentially drop it entirely in 5.0.
Yeah.
Brent,
No to me or no to Matt?
No, both of you to know. No. I don't think we should drop CNI until the net filter stuff is done. Or was it net tables or whatever it is? The one that we haven't done needs to be done.
we are no worse than them in that respect. They do
That
not
doesn't
have.
matter.
I'm thinking about this in terms of, can we get it out before Rel 10?
All right, so what's the real question? What are
I
you
think-
really asking to do?
One, drop CNI and put a deprecated notice in main right now. Like,
Yes,
do it
that's
today.
fine.
Two, figure out what the first release going into Rel is and drop CNI before that, or at least conditional compile it and don't compile it into 10. Because if we put it in 10, we are guaranteeing we have to support that. for
No,
the next 10
there's
years.
no doubt about that. So 5.0 would be to me would be the drop time. I had to excuse myself, but I was able to hear the conversation. I had an interruption here. So that's fine. On the Podman 5.0 thing, I'm gonna start a document here shortly. The problem that I'm having is that we have yet undefined requirements from the desktop team on what needs to be done on 5. And as far as 5 timing, in the most ideal world, 5.0 gone out in early spring, and 5.1 will be something that's real, or 5.05, depending on how we do going out the door, but something like the second release coming just before Red Hat Summit. So if I had my most ideal schedule, that would be it. And there should be not spend a lot of time thinking about why I would want it that way. The desktop team is going to do some splashes probably there. And it may very likely require some change on our behalf to be able to support them to do that. But that's all undefined right now, so that makes it a little fuzzy. But we should start 5.0 doc that starts talking about the things we're going to deprecate. We already know that. That's unrelated to machine and anything else. Also talked about containers conf evolution. So there's plenty of things we could, put in there right now and start talking about. But it probably warrants a series of short conversations about things, and then we can document it in a document if folks are okay with that. And I'm happy to lead that effort.
Matt had talked about doing similar thing.
Yeah, I heard that. I just
Sounds like it's a
I
combination.
probably should own it, since the decisions are probably in the end between Mark and I.
Yep.
On some of this stuff. So yeah, that. But otherwise, I think everything else is online, Matt. I mean, we're right on top of it. And at this point, late in the 4.8 game, let's get the deprecation notices on things, and we'll contemplate the actual drop or compile out type approach for 5.
What are you talking about when you talk about deprecation notice? Like in the
Well, I
code?
think we needed to display some sort of CNI is going away.
Yeah,
You know.
and that's where I'm like, that means a warning on every command. Like if everywhere
We
where you
can
touch
do a
CNI,
suppress thing too, can't we? Though.
Just network create, maybe? I mean...
Yeah.
Ultimately, I
Yeah,
would definitely want to see it in the man pages, and I want to see it on any command that creates a new network that is using
Sure.
the old tech.
That's fair. And then we can get the usual docs and social media stuff out there, getting that idea out. And I wonder too, does RPM even maybe have a deprecation approach to, like, when it gets installed, to say, hey, this is not a thing. So anyways,
We can emit warnings maybe when something is installed or updated.
Paul, I don't know exactly what it means, but it's something along those lines. We don't want to spam people, which I think is your concern.
Yeah, it's just like putting it in docs is totally fine, but it will miss a lot of people, like just running in some deployments. So
Understood.
It's a difficult line to navigate, like too much spam and not reaching the users. So
Indeed.
I mean, just putting it in the release notes is going to generate a lot of interest. We'll put it that way. So getting it out there that it's going to be gone is critical.
We can also, Paul, we could do the message on everyone, and in the message say, touch a file here to suppress this warning. So give them an out. There's lots of options.
do we need a change proposal for Fedora or something like that?
I don't believe so. We may need to talk to FCOS, but as far as I'm concerned, this doesn't affect them. Toolbox, it may impact.
No, it doesn't impact Toolbox.
Okay.
They use host networking exclusively. So
okay, that's even better.
Realistically speaking, I think that we're going to need a change request for Podman 5, obviously, but I don't think we need to be more general than that. Or more specific than that, I should say. I think we can just do one broad. We're upgrading to Podman 5. It'll have the following changes.
I just wondered too if we should put in an early deprecation notice into the 8993 docs before it goes out.
It's not going to be deprecated in 8.9.
No,
CNI is going to be the standard on 8 for the lifetime. I wonder if we already did it in 9. I almost feel like we were discussing that at some point, but
all right, let me run down 9 then.
that's another part of why we can actually get away with this now. We're looking at the last major code drop into RHEL 8 at some point in the very near future. And once that's done, we can actually think about getting rid of a lot of the stuff we were keeping around 4.8.
So can we rewrite Podman into Rust by 5.0?
Sure. We're just going to have to drop machine and compose, and I don't know. We'll choose like 50% of the code base. We'll rewrite that. That's what you get.
Okay. So I guess I took the ball on the 5.0 stuff, and we'll just do some basic meetings to carve out some basic time and some meetings to get everyone's thoughts for 5.0 at least written down, and then we can begin to evaluate and document them.
Should we move on to generate systemd, or did we kind of discuss that?
In terms of deprecating it?
It's already deprecated. Wonderful.
It's been marked.
Yeah, we just went out of order, and I'm just looking at the order here of the agenda. So we're all set there.
In terms of moving on, I'd be happy to move on to the next thing to talk about.
The next thing is others. So I guess this is, does anyone else have anything they would want deprecated for potential removal or adjustment in 5.0? Or not even deprecated. Does anyone have anything they want changed in the future to prepare for 5.0?
I would like a containers conf v2. Do we have that written down?
I don't think it's captured yet. Yeah.
Okay. I think that there's one thing for a machine is I'm probably not going to have to sell this team very hard, but I think that we need to probably make every JSON config that keeps track of the machine's resources and where everything sits the same across all providers. It is not today.
I think we really just need to write down major machine refactor and then figure out what stems off of that.
Well, I think a lot of that will be done in the 4 versions. So specifically, because this may be a breaking change, is what I'm.
Yeah. We're discussing 4.8 as well as 5.0. So I'm like 4.8, 4.9, whatever we do before 5, I think we have to do a lot of refactoring to get ready for 5.
And I'm also seriously contemplating a proposal that would make transition from 4 to 5 in the machine world not a thing. In other words, it's a breaking machine release. Overt action by users will have to be taken. So that's something that we need to debate the ups and downs of that. But I have good reasons, which I don't really want to go into right now. But so that's the thing. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just not explicitly related to machine, but general. I think we shouldn't change things just because we, like without benefit, right? Like we have a chance to break something, that's fine, but that doesn't mean we need to break everything, right?
Right. So here I'm probably trying to dig out a little more space than we need so that we're not pulling ourselves into migration scenarios that may overtax us for the simple recovery of Podman machine remove, Podman machine init, and you're back up and running. You just don't have your content. So
yeah, I mean that's I think that's a fine assumption for a lot of things, but it would be good to document such assumptions in a way. Like if there's a lot of like user data in the machine that's just gone, right? And
Yep.
I think some users might not really understand the concept. Like if you like in bug reports, if you ask them just recreate the machine and then oops.
Yep. And the other bit is we may be able to do some hanky-panky around just anyways, I have some ideas on how we can potentially get around this. I think, Matt, there was some stuff which I can't remember around spec gen that we also had contemplated that we're breaking. So we'll need somebody to crawl through the spec gen and take a look.
So with spec gen, the important part is to have a way to define defaults on the server side. With that comes together with containers.conf somehow.
Yes.
Because we want defaults on the server side for the most part.
I think the ideal way to do this would be to refactor it so that defaults are set in a common way across local and remote. Like the spec gen gets pre-populated in a sensible way, and it's those defaults that get displayed via the command line. But
I mean, that's kind of what we did. That's kind of what we did when we went from whatever prior to spec gen. I forget what it was called, but to spec gen is we did some of that rearranging, twisting. So it seems like we have to do that again to deal with remote.
And what I would really love is some refactoring around what's remote and what's local in the code, like the separation of concern in these packages. It's a mess, and to be honest, there's a pretty big bug in a lot of things that these rootless checks. We have plenty of them on the client where it makes no sense at all.
Fair enough. Matt, there's one other big one, which is system connection. Is going to need to be rehammered out because it was never, when John designed that, it was never designed for, it was designed for remote and local. Basically, hey, I want to add a remote connection. I don't want to type it every time. And then we started using that for machine. Okay, so now we've got system connection that is remote in every sense, but it also could be different depending on the provider of the vert machine. And so the name of the connection is something like Podman machine default when you don't name your VM. And it's theoretically possible to have Podman machine default with multiple providers. And then we get system connection collisions. So we'll probably need to build some robustness into system connection that allows a provider to be specified.
I would label this under containers.conf rewrite. And like we don't want this in containers.conf at all, as we talked about. We don't want to write a containers.conf file because that rewrites a personal config file and you lose all comments and so on, what we mentioned.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, and maybe more of that needs to go into that world. But again, so that's something, and that theoretically could be breaking if we can't figure out, that's to me, that's going to probably be a breaking change, or we're going to figure out if machines are breaking changes, then there's no reason to try to compensate for system connections, in my opinion. So.
All right.
I had a fun one today. Another interesting thing, there's in our flag parsing code, there's a thing called string slice and string array. And I bet only a few people know what that means, what the difference is. Because if you pass array flags, you have the chance to, like as a slice, you can comma separate values. And as an array, you just like need it multiple times. And as it turns out, comma separated values are passed as C3, and that is not happy if you pass in like quotes and other stuff. If you have a regular T3 file, basically, there are rules. And just today, a user there's incredible stupid syntax that you need to use if you have these slice things. And we have slice defined everywhere, like for options that accept the file path. That means you cannot have a comma in the file path and stuff like that.
We really should just have a linter to detect that. There are very few cases where you actually want string slice.
Exactly. But the problem is, as I noted on the issue, we cannot change this without breaking somebody. Because the CSV, if you figured out the CSV syntax, then you escape it with quotes and so on. But then that means the value, as soon as I change it to array, is no longer the same value that you get when you use string slice.
5.0 stuff. We can break the small portion of people who actually do these things in 5.0. This is the kind of thing where I would argue it's a bug fix, not even a breaking change, but we can do it in 5.0, so we can do it anyways.
Yep.
That's where I'm getting at.
Just looking at the clock, and we're seeming to grind on this just a little bit. Where do we have anything else major that needs to get in, and or can we create a discussion perhaps on the GitHub site for things you'd like to see in 5.0, or has one been created already?
I don't think we have a GitHub discussion. That's a good point. I think that we should probably have our internal discussions first so we can pre-populate. But once that's done, we can get something up and see what people think. We also probably should have a blog about this, but yeah.
It'd be nice though to have a place where people can just go ahead and put their ideas and go from there.
Yeah, one thing, if we say we have a deadline next summer, then I think it's important to focus on stuff that requires some breaking changes, because if we talk about features, we can add features at any point if there are true features, like a new command or something. That I think that would be important to allocate resources correctly, so that we can get stuff that needs to happen for 5.0 and that cannot wait for 5.1 or whatever.
Fair enough. We really need to get the doc started before we can start clarifying this. But yeah, I will see how soon I can carve this into the schedule, because I think this is an important one to start talking about.
I concur. Great. I think I'm going to wrap up this particular discussion, Matt, unless you need to talk about anything else, and just open it up for any questions before we wrap up for the day that anybody else had related to this or anything else for that matter. Very quiet. Right, last chance. Otherwise, I'll start.
Come on, you waited this long.
Yeah. I'll just put in just a note for when our next meetings are. Our next meeting, we've actually got one coming up pretty quickly for the community meeting. That's happening on Tuesday, October 4th. I'm not sure that we have many, if any, topics at this point for that one. So if you'd like to demo something there, we'd love to have people do so. And then the next Cabal meeting will be on Thursday, October 19th. And both of those meetings will be on at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And both will be daylight savings time still. I don't think we flip over until November for daylight savings time in this country anyway. And one last chance for questions, comments, thoughts. Otherwise, I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll wrap that up. Right, folks. That is the end of the recording.